The Consumer Bankers Association is pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Mastering the Customer Experience, What Consumers Expect from Financial Institutions, by Equifax. My name is Kate, and it is my pleasure to be the facilitator for today's event. I would like to formally welcome the participants joining us today. Please note today's call is being recorded and all participant lines will be muted during the broadcast. If you experience technical difficulties with the web portion of today's program, please email cba@compartners.com or send a message in the chat box. If you are listening to the program over the phone and you need assistance at any time, please press *0 and an operator will assist you. This presentation will last up to 60 minutes and will include question and answer opportunities at the end. You may submit a question at any time by typing into the chat box in the lower left corner of the screen and clicking the send button. I would like to direct your attention to the links box located on the left side of the screen where resources are located for you to view, save, or print. Simply click on the link of your choice and a separate web browser window will open. This will not interfere with your viewing of the program. As a reminder, the views expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and do not represent the views of CBA or its members. It is now my pleasure to introduce Teresa Fries, who will introduce the speakers for today's webinar. Teresa?
Thank you, Kate, and thank you once again for joining today's webinar, Mastering the Customer Experience, What Consumers Expect from Financial Institutions. Before we introduce our presenters, I would like to take a moment just to help set the stage for today's webinar. In 2018 and late 2018, Equifax commissioned Forrester Research to conduct two studies, one among consumers and one among financial institutions in the U.S., primarily banks, credit unions, and lenders, with the objective of understanding consumer expectations of their banking providers, and on the flip side, what financial institutions are delivering based on their perceptions of what consumers want and need. The results point to a clear disconnect in what banks think customers want and what they actually want. In today's webinar, we will explore that disconnect and share key findings to help you master the customer experience. At the end of today's call, we will also share additional resources with you, including our recently published white paper on this topic entitled How to Become Your Customer's Favorite Bank, Even If You Can't Be Their Only One. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Our first presenter is Peter Wanamaker, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Peter works with bank executives and their digital teams to challenge thinking and lead change in banking. Peter's strategic frameworks help banks build a plan of attack for future disruption, and he leads Forrester's ongoing digital banking benchmark research. Peter's recent research includes Amazon invades banking, Here's What You Should Do, and Bots Aren't Ready to Be Bankers. Peter has appeared in American Banker, Bloomberg Businessweek, CNBC, The New York Times, TechCrunch, and The Wall Street Journal. We'll then be joined by Chris Atwood, SVP and Senior Marketing Officer at Equifax. Chris leads strategy, product, marketing, distribution, and pricing for the company's U.S. Information Solutions business. During his tenure, Chris has also led new product innovation and existing product portfolios for enterprise verticals and domains in the U.S., and was responsible for integrating Equifax enterprise assets, data, analytics, technology, and expertise. He has also led various marketing and leadership positions across Equifax Personal Solutions. Prior to joining Equifax, Chris served as client partner for Gen X, an internet professional services firm, and he has also served in various leadership positions at advertising agencies and internet professional services firms in both the U.S. and around the world. So at this time, please join me in welcoming Peter Wanamaker, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Peter?
Thank you very much. Thank you to Teresa and to Chris for joining me today. Thank you to all of you for joining me. So me and my team at Forrester really enjoyed working with Equifax on this primary research, and it was really interesting to see, as we'll show you in really just a few minutes, the gap that is evident, and I would argue likely to be widening, between how bank executives, banks, and their teams see the world and how bank customers see the world. And we're going to talk about some of the big gaps, some of the places that are perilous, to use the word we're using here, And we're going to talk about some next steps and some examples of how that can be shifted and how banks and digital teams at banks can think about better serving, better designing experiences for their customers and, frankly, their prospects. So I don't want to beat around the bush. I want to get right down to what we see as the problem and distill down a lot of the work we've already done, the research we've done, as well as the analysis of that data, and break it down this way. Here's the problem we see. Customer shifting behavior, and maybe more importantly, their rising expectations, are outpacing financial institutions, banks, digital transformation efforts. So there are a lot of laudable digital transformation efforts going on, frankly, in almost every bank in the world. And yet, when we look at how fast those banks are maturing and transforming and redesigning experiences relative to their customers, their shifting behavior, their rising expectations, their evolving needs, we see, as I said a few moments ago, that widening gap, and that's a real problem. The reason that's a problem is it can usher in what Forrester calls the dual disruptive threats of disintermediation and commoditization. And this is obviously just an illustration that you're looking at now, but it gives you a sense. For really about 100 years, banking providers, lenders, card providers, FIs in general, had a very close relationship with people, with their customers. Not all, obviously there are different business models, but a lot of them were highly relevant in people's everyday lives. What we're seeing is that a bunch of disruptors, yes, many of them are fintech firms and small startups. Some of them, of course, are large disruptive firms like Amazon and Google and Facebook. And others are sort of mixed. They might be a retailer. They might be an existing financial services company that's moving into adjacent spaces. The most interesting, of course, are usually the fintech ones and small startups that are really disrupting things, upending the way the market works. And yet all of these are causing disruption and disintermediating the traditional banking providers, the incumbent FIs, from their relationship with customers, right? And then that, of course, leads to commoditization, this view that all banks are basically the same. And just to put a data point on this, we have found that 1 in 3 consumers in the U.S. agree with the statement, all banks are basically the same, which is, of course, essentially the definition of a commodity. That's a dangerous place. A complete lack of differentiation is a problem for many banks. Not all banks, but many banks. And when that's paired with a risk of non-banks coming in and getting in between your customers and you, that's a very dangerous recipe for bank brands and for banks, frankly, future success as organizations, as companies. So we did this work, as Teresa outlined. It was really interesting work. We're going to talk you through some of the detailed data in just a few minutes. A key finding we had was this. Banking experiences must be seen as useful and easy for a bank brand to achieve sustained growth in what Forrester calls the age of the customer. Let's just say, I can talk about that for hours, but let's just say over the next business cycle, the next 5, 10, 15, even 20 years. So yes, emotion has a big impact on long-term banking relationships. And yet, I don't say yet, in addition to that, when a customer is evaluating their banking relationship on an everyday basis, and especially early on in that relationship, if those experiences aren't useful and easy, it's a really dangerous problem for banks. So let's talk about what our data actually shows. Our data shows a number of things. This is going to be the first slide. We're going to show you roughly, I think, about a dozen data slides, including, obviously, many dozens of data points. So when we asked bank customers, U.S.-based consumers, what was important to them when deciding on a new financial product or service, we found that, and this is my own sort of phrasing here, is as form follows function, our emotion follows utility, right? That form follows function, of course, a famous architectural adage. Emotion follows utility. That doesn't mean that one is more important. In fact, in the long run, emotion has more impact. And yet in the near term, as people are evaluating their brand choice, and also often early in that relationship, and frankly on a day-to-day basis, as our data shows, that utility really matters. So unsurprisingly, the number one answer here, so you can see in green is that they ranked it number 1, so we gave them the choice of ranking these. And then the blue is they ranked this anywhere 2, 3, 4, or 5. So yes, unsurprisingly, best rate, offer, deal is number 1. What's really interesting, though, is as you look along, the third one down is really interesting, right? Almost 6 in 10 chose this as either one of the top 5, so or more than 6 in 10 chose it as one of the top 5. Many chose it as 2 through 5, so very important. Is the bank or financial services company clearly explains its fees, prices, etc.? Likewise, if you look a little bit further down, clearly explaining the product, making the application process easy, and of course, higher up, level of customer service during the accompanying the product or service, very important. None of these are shocking, right? They're something that sort of goes along with what we've seen for years, and yet what's really important here is this is top of mind for customers. So again, I've probably said too many times now, the emotional connection does come, and it's important. It's part of that branding, long-term brand strategy, and yet you need to be thinking about that utility aspect of it as well. And when we're looking at, so I want to go down to a couple of these, as I mentioned a moment ago, clearly explaining fees and clearly explaining the product or service. This is something that the majority of banks don't do well, and I can quantify that if you look at some other Forrester research. Frankly, inside the research we did with Equifax, you can see some of that. We see little glimpses of what a best practice will be like or should be like. Here's just one example from Scotiabank, right? Scotiabank does a really good job on its mobile website, which is very important during the sales or the shopping journey for the customer, of offering tips on how to avoid or reduce fees, helping explain fees. And by the way, I'll just note again, this is something that actually a lot of fintech companies are pretty good at, is saying, here's how we make money, here are the fees, very clearly explaining those fees as well as the products in a way that's not just clear, or sorry, I should say not just exhaustive, but clear and in some ways conversational in tone. So the customer really has a sense as they're applying of what they're getting out of this relationship, out of this product. So as we go on, what our data showed with Equifax is there is a disconnect. And I'm going to show you 2 really important slides with some pullouts, some callouts in here. So when we looked at how consumers see one aspect of their financial lives versus how bank executives think customers, what they think those customers' financial lives are like, this is what we see. So bottom line, although it's true that 2/3 of consumers say that their finances are not that complicated, 80% of bank executives say that consumers need professional help managing their money. So what's important here is, and you'll see this in the next slide as well, let's put aside for a moment the accuracy of consumers' self-evaluation, right? Because I think that we all know that when you look at financial literacy, there's a lot of firms out there. Pew does a good job of charting the fact that this is still a problem in the U.S. and frankly in a lot of markets. The problem, though, is self-perception. It is going to be very hard to build a relationship with a customer who isn't thinking that what the main problem they're looking for, at least the majority of them are looking for, is help with the complexity of their financial lives. They may well need that, right? So banks don't need to give up on this idea of helping to serve and simplify and enable complex financial relationships, complex financial products, but they do need to be recognizing that it's not so, it is not as straightforward to the customer why they need a bank, why they need a banking product. Excuse me. So another way of looking at this, when we ask customers about their knowledge of banking, again, more than 2/3 said, I'm knowledgeable about banking, right? That's either agree or strongly agree with that statement. And yet, when we ask banking executives how knowledgeable they think consumers are, less than 4 in 10 think that they are knowledgeable at all about banking, right? Again, you could put aside for just a moment the accuracy of whether those customers, right, if they were given a short quiz on banking, they might not do great. That's not the main focus here. The question is the perception, the value perception of banking products and banking relationships. And there is a clear disconnect, a gap, between the way the bank executives see it and the way their customers, their clients, see the world. So, another area that we looked at in our work with Equifax was personalization. And again, I'm sorry to say that there is a big gap. Personalization right now is really missing the mark. And this is actually an interesting piece of data that we saw in a couple of the survey questions, or I should say a couple of the data that came from survey questions. And that is this sense that consumers don't feel like they're rewarded for their loyalty to a banking provider, to a financial institution. That's an interesting, right now, any of us can go walk around the streets and see that there's a loyalty program for virtually every retailer, every, pharmacy, every shoe store, I don't even know. And yet banks certainly have some loyalty programs built in, and certainly they're trying to be the hub sometimes of a loyalty experience. They're not doing a good job of conveying to customers and making those customers feel like they are rewarded for their loyalty to the brand. That's a dangerous situation to be in. So again, we ask the similar questions to the banking executives and to consumers, and you can see the guy on the left-hand side, to me, is the most important part of this. You can look at number 2, this idea of helping customers feel understood as individuals rather than part of a mass audience, right? So banks think they're pretty good at this. Customers think they are not doing very good about this. I'm sorry, this is about how motivating it is, and yet that's still indicative of that concern, that gap that we're seeing. And then when we look on the right-hand side, so what is your bank currently doing to promote customer loyalty, right? So consumers, the top 3 actions are doing some exclusive savings. That certainly would be helpful. And yet when we're looking down at the bank's top 3 actions, it's helping them feel understood. Yes, that's worthy. That's definitely, none of these are things that banks and bank executives should abandon. But it's the prioritization, the emphasis, the focus, where you're investing your people, your money, and frankly, to some degree, your brand positioning, there's a gap evident there. And then I will note, so the second one in the bank's top 3 actions is making it easier for consumers to bank with us, e.g. mobile banking. I'm really glad to see that this is something that is a point of emphasis for banks, and yet when you look at the wider research, Forrester's as well as the work we did, Forrester's ongoing research as well as the work we did here with Equifax, it's evident that, and I'll show you a data point in just a few minutes that shows that customers see banks as doing relatively worse in mobile experiences than they are in a lot of other areas, and that's a problem. Because again, most of the upstarts are, of course, digital upstarts. They're the ones looking to disintermediate. It's pretty rare. I can't think of a single one that's trying to reinvent what a branch is. I'm talking about a fintech firm trying to reinvent what a branch is. Instead, most of them are looking at mobile experiences. Some are even, of course, app only, as we've seen emerge, especially in the last year and a half. So, personalization is missing the mark. When it comes to differentiation, there's this, here disconnect isn't quite the right word, there's an interesting landscape that we're seeing when it comes to bank brands and their positions in the market. So, the light green middle section, right, mostly in the middle, right, so top here, being convenient or easy to work with, 48%. That is the percentage of people who said that there's a small group of banks that do this well, but most don't. And then interestingly here, on the far left here, that's the all banks are pretty much the same in this particular area. So as I said earlier, about a third say that that's true in general, but in these particular areas. So one, and I want to call out very quickly because I think it's really important, the bottom row here, offering a wide range of products or services. 4 in 10 say all banks are pretty much the same. And this, by the way, I don't know, I imagine many of you are frankly nodding your heads right now because that's true, right? When you look at banks' product lines, there are differences in the rewards they offer for their credit cards. There are certainly some different, of course, there are differences in rates, and there are differences in the quality of, let's say, digital banking services. But when you look at their core product set, it is virtually identical bank to bank, especially for most retail bank brands. And customers are aware of that. That is not a point of differentiation. In contrast, you see a couple places that there are some interesting things where there's, my primary bank is the only one that does this well. So if you look at providing excellent customer service, that's one. Offering the best rates. And then the top one I think is interesting because it's much more laid into that intersection, I'll say, between utility and emotion. That's being convenient or easy to work with. So consumers overall are seeing a small group of banks that are differentiating their brand, but not in general major differentiate on an individual brand level. And when we look at the wider landscape, that's a problem because unlike 25 years ago, where having a branch near people was a key differentiating point, or at least a key reason that people continue to bank with a certain brand. That is disappearing as customers, even if they still go into branches sometimes, do more and more of their banking either through the phone or, of course, on online and mobile platforms. So, I want to quickly call out one more data point on this particular slide, and that's more than 8 in 10 bank executives, 84% to be really specific, believe their firm is good at differentiating itself from other banking providers. In some ways, I think this data point and this slide, I guess I'll say, with this call out, is the one that most concerns me. So, as we said earlier, broadly speaking, we're seeing customers' expectations outpace banks' digital reinvention. That's dangerous, their digital transformation. And yet what really worries me is if every bank brand, if most, or I should say, if almost all bank executives think that their brand is differentiated, but customers don't see it that way, that is a recipe for what I talked about earlier, the dual disruptive threats of disintermediation and commoditization. And I think I've used this word a lot, but I think it's the right word, which is that's a dangerous situation. And when I say that, it's not as existential as it might have been for media companies in the late 90s, early 2000s, certainly music companies at the turn of this century. It's not even for retailers looking at Amazon and other direct-to-consumer brands. What it's more about is the ability to see profitable growth over the long term. That's what's at risk if a bank gets disintermediated and becomes essentially a commodity bank brand. Unless they plan around that and really focus on being, ultra efficient on the back end, there are ways to be profitable while being commodity bank brand. It's just a lot harder, and many banks are not prepared for that because they haven't needed to be for really, as I said earlier, about a century. So, bottom line here, there's a good chance your bank or the bank that you work with will never be a customer's only bank. But you can be their favorite bank. And this isn't, false optimism. I hope it doesn't read as such. Equifax and I worked on this for a long time, and when we looked at all the data, distilled it down, analyzed it, we really felt like this was a key takeaway. So, yes, there are going to be bank brands, and there are going to be customers for whom a bank is their one-stop shop. The vast majority, though, are looking for a number of different, and we'll talk through some more data in just a few minutes, are looking for multiple relationships, different product sets from different companies. And I actually think that's okay. What's really valuable is proving your utility to the bank customer and then driving that emotional connection. We're going to talk through that a little bit more. I'm also going to talk about a bank that really has been very successful despite being a traditional bank, BBVA. I'm going to talk about them in just a moment. So when we look at what customers think banks are strong at or good at and what they're relatively poor at or in some cases actually poor at, this is what we're seeing. So we asked them to think about banks that they use in general. So yes, just to zero in on this area again, the concern is that mobile apps, so 69% of consumers say that banks are good here. That's certainly better than what we would have seen a few years ago when we did similar research at Forrester. And yet, as you can see, it's still relatively weak relative to other areas of banking. And it's a problem because mobile is today the battleground for brand differentiation in banking. It is not the most widely used touch point when you look at all segments. And yet, when you look at the customers who are making brand choices, when you look at which touch points they're using on a more frequent basis, mobile is incredibly important. So the fact that this is further down the list, both of these mobile app and mobile website, is a dangerous place to be for many banks. I promise I'll use a different word than dangerous. I don't know why I'm stuck on that today. So I want to take a quick moment and look at what Forrester identified as one of the top brands in mobile banking around the world, and it's an incumbent bank. There are plenty of good startups. There are plenty of good incumbents as well. This one really does top the charts in many different ways, and that's BBVA. So they consistently design context-driven mobile experiences, and in just a few minutes we're going to talk about the importance of utilizing data to design better experiences for customers, what we call insights-driven or context-driven. So we define context as all the information you have, basically everything you know about a customer, an individual customer, at the point of engagement. So here you can see some examples of them offering both high-level advice as well as personalized advice inside the mobile banking experience, offering them a bit of a financial wellness view of their current money management situation. And I want to give you just a quick couple of bullets on how BBVA gets digital banking experiences right. So number one, they have a careful balance, and I don't love that word because it's really an interweaving. It's not a balance because they're not opposing forces. But they have a really nice way of weaving together functionality and user experience and the UI itself. So they explore new features in beta and then fully integrate that functionality with back-end systems so that almost none of their mobile banking experiences, and ultimately none of them after a few months, feel to the customer like bolt-on experience. So customers don't know when they're using, some third-party vendor and it's just stuck on there, and yet they know what it feels like when there is a bolt-on experience. They know what it feels like when the front end doesn't have access to the various legacy systems it needs to access to create great personalized experiences. Number two, they have consistent UX best practices across all digital banking task flows. So they're one of only 2 European banks with progress indicators for every activity. And they have omnipresent task-specific help content. They have app-wide intelligent search, something that 6 years ago no bank in the world had. Now they are the ones, frankly, leading when it comes to app-wide search. And finally, they have great cross-selling. And this isn't about pushing, throwing offers at a customer. This is about giving those customers clarity and confidence when they are looking for another product, another service that's valuable to them in their financial lives. So I want to take a moment and just talk about that because mobile is going to be a really important part. We've talked today about the risk of commoditization in banking. Mobile is going to be one area where if you're a bank that wants to be your customer's favorite bank, you're going to need to get mobile right. Getting back to the data, I want to zero in on the last 5 data points here, the last 5 rows. So I'm just going to quickly read through them. This is about understanding what different products and services are going to cost, so transparency of pricing, and not just what it will cost, but how it's priced. Making it easy for them to send money to other people, so not moving money between accounts, but P2P essentially, right? The Zelle, the Venmo world. Making it clear when I will be charged a fee, right? Again, this is into fee transparency, cost transparency. Only selling me, promoting products that are relevant to my banking needs. This is something, as I mentioned a moment ago, BBVA does much better than almost anyone. And then giving me advice about how to better manage my money. It's worth noting that 50% of people, only 50% think that banks do even a good job in this area, right? When we talk about money management, the work we did with Equifax really shone a spotlight on the fact that basic functionality is really pretty strong when you look at banking experiences today. Advanced, advice-based functionality and features are really either non-existent or poor or clunky when it comes to the experience. That's a real problem for banks. So I want to just give a couple of examples that show sort of best practices or examples from these areas, good examples, not bad ones. So Ally does a great job. It has proactive chat that answers customers' questions clearly and completely. We've tested this a bunch of times. Is it perfect? No, but it's really strong offering and really valuable. USAA has something similar, but it's an automated version, right? It's essentially an in-app agent, an in-app chat bot, and it's really well designed. Now, this one, obviously, bots are often clunky. USAA runs into problems sometimes, but on the whole, it's one of the most consistent, and it really does a good job on a couple of rare but important mobile moments, like when a customer is looking for images of past checks, something that certainly people don't do on an everyday basis, and when they need it, it's a really important and really crucial experience for them. And USAA's in-app bot lets you quickly find them and then view images of them, which we don't show here because we don't want to expose personal data, but lets you view them inside that conversational interface, that chat bot. TD, among others, is finding ways to weave and embed spend analysis and budgeting tools into the mobile banking experience, something that more banks are experimenting with. It's going to be a while before we figure out how to make this work well. FinTech focus on very niche parts of digital money management and do a great job. Banks, of course, often need to try to distill down lots of different money management capabilities into, very small real estate, frankly. So all of this is valuable. This is examples of where banks can do a better job in some of those areas we talked about just a moment ago. I want to say something else that's bigger than any one feature, bigger than any one touch point, bigger, frankly, than any one bank, and that is this. Bank brands will need to play well with others. They will need to be more open, and I mean that with a capital O, but also the more sort of general open. They will need to, and it'll be about partnerships, it'll be about ecosystems, it'll be about open APIs and APIs, even as they seek to become a customer's favorite brand. So this is data that I found really interesting. Some of it was unsurprising but still shocking or scary. This one was kind of surprising to me. So we asked consumers, if you could, how would you prefer to manage your money and financial accounts? And by far the plurality here, 42%, which as you can see is more than twice as high as any other answer, was I'd prefer to use a range of different financial providers but have one primary relationship with a single firm. That is, as I said, not quite a majority, but it is the most common answer. It's a plurality. So this to me indicates where things are heading and why banks need to be able to be open and be part of a wider ecosystem, even as they try to demonstrate that they're the best one, right? You can be someone's favorite brand even if you're not their only brand. As well as being more open and playing well with others, to use a sort of cliche term, banks are going to need to make better use of data. So this chart shows where banks, this is from our bank survey, of course, where banks are collecting customer data. And if you look down this list, you go, wow, this is actually pretty good, right? They're collecting it from a whole range of sources. This is fantastic. And that's true. Banks have always been pretty good at collecting data. The problem is they are really bad at utilizing that data in a way that creates more relevant experiences for their customers. So this is the exact same order, in case it's not clear. That's why it looks a little funky. And when we look at all the various types of data that you collect, which is being used to better understand your customers and create better, more relevant experiences, none of them reach 50%, right? That is a problematic place to be, because we know that data is what's necessary to create context-driven experiences like what BBVA does. And to put it simply, this is a quote I like from a banking executive that we work with. We are drowning in data and starving for insight, right? Banks are chock full of data, and they've been good at keeping and holding and even managing it to some degree, but using it to drive insights and create better experiences for customers, some of which is visible to the client, right? So providing insights directly to the customer. We're seeing firms like RBC do that, certainly BBVA does that, USAA does that, but also taking those insights to design better experiences in ways that are invisible to the customer, right? So recognizing patterns of behavior and then developing your app, your digital experience, and frankly, some of your cross-channel experiences or omni-channel experiences in a way that meet those patterns of behavior. So I'm going to hand it over to Chris in just a moment. But last, I want to go through one area that's really important, which is based on the work that we did with Equifax. We believe that bank brands will fit into customers' lives in one of three ways. And these are different. These are not in one universe, obviously. So on the far left, there's a control tower. This is really where the bank is the trusted resource that's guiding customers. You have to be their favorite brand for you to have a control tower relationship with them. Second one can be very profitable and very valuable, and that's an accessory brand, right? You can be a very highly differentiated, very valuable financial services accessory brand. And then third is a component part. And again, as I said early in this conversation, this can be a model for growth. It's a lot more difficult. It's not what most retail banks are built around, and yet more are going to get used to the fact that they are a component part in other people's ecosystems. So they provide the lending, the loans, the decisioning, the banking services, the back-end deposits, as other people create front-end experiences for the customers. And finally, I just want to talk through some next steps, what you as a bank should do now. Number one, stop trying to be your customer's one and only one-stop shop for everything banking and financial services. Some of you are going to continue to pursue this, and that can be all right, depending on how large you are, what role, or for certain segments. And yet, the idea of being everything to everyone all the time is not going to work anymore. And It'll be more successful. You will be more successful as you recognize that. Number two, in contrast to that being the one-stop, one and only, identify the role that your brand will play within different markets, different segments, and different ecosystems. Number three, sounds obvious, and yet it's maybe the most important, shore up, advance your mobile banking features and your mobile banking experiences. Number four, design and build the systems and processes and customer experiences around data-driven insights, insights-driven or context-driven experiences. And then number five is the one I talked about being more open, right? Creating an action plan for what we call dynamic ecosystems of value, whatever you call them, is that customers are regularly putting together their own ecosystems, or in some cases sitting on other people's platforms like Amazon or like voice assistants, and banks will fit into that space and need to have an action plan and a vision for that. So that's my part of it. I'm going to be sticking around as I listen to Chris, and then we're going to be answering questions. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but thank you all for listening, and look forward to some of the questions. And with that, Chris, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Peter, and thanks again to all of you for joining us today. As a reminder, I'm Chris Atwood, and I'm the Senior Marketing Officer for the United States Information Solutions business at Equifax. And, as a reminder, Peter reminded us earlier, customer engagement has forever changed. As you can see on the screen, overwhelmingly, customer interactions are shifting into the digital world. And as that happens, consumer expectations continue to grow. And just let's look at some of the stats on the page. So, first, 72% or nearly 3/4 of consumers say they expect you to understand their specific and or unique needs. And 70% say technology is making it easier to find an experience that meets their expectations, which means new forms of utility and convenience are raising the bar for all of us across the board. And while mobile or digital first is leading, as consumers, we expect not just consistent, but connected and integrated experiences across channels. And so this is where we're having a great deal of discussion with our financial services customers as people continue to move away from interpersonal interactions at the store or branch and toward the anywhere location of mobile commerce. Our financial institution customers are finding it harder and harder to deliver really relevant, meaningful, engaging customer interactions. Quite possibly your organization is faced with a similar challenge, so what are we to do? Step one is better understanding what consumers expect and the implications for your operational readiness as an organization. As Peter told us earlier, utility leads the way in financial services. As consumers shop and buy and own financial services across channels, they expect their experiences fit their needs in terms of personalization, relevancy, and simplicity. So what does that mean for your organization? We found that leaders delivering an exceptional customer experience have translated these consumer expectations internally into organizational competencies. So personalization means being able to accurately identify and understand your individual customers and or households. Relevancy means the ability to provide contextual, timely offers at the moment it's needed most. And simplicity means removing barriers and simplifying the buying and owning experience. So easier said than done. I won't cover all these bullets in great detail, but I did just want to, cover some top line and share some additional insight on best practices for each category. And so, in the category of identifying and understanding your customer, we see industry leaders doing a few things very well. First, leveraging a broad array of data to create the fullest picture possible of that customer and or household. Data including their credit profile, income, wealth, purchase behaviors, attitudes, other preferences, and leveraging time series data versus a static snapshot to identify those more dynamic trends and patterns. Second, industry leaders have mature capabilities to key and link this vast array of data. Both your internal data, as Peter talked about, collecting a lot of really good data today, but augmented with third-party data from multiple sources to create a single, comprehensive, and accurate view of the consumer or household. And third is the ability to develop deeply predictive analytics that better predict propensity and preferences such as purchase timing of, say, a home or car, the type of car class or a brand preference, spending preferences and behavior, et cetera. And then finally, the technology and operational readiness to deliver those insights across channels, retargeting that insight or offer wherever you see that customer, in the store, online, in the call center, wherever they are. In relation to delivering appropriate and timely offers, technology and operational readiness are critical to creating and delivering contextually relevant offers. So using propensity, using life stage, or even life event triggers to deliver engagements that meet the customer where they are at the moment of their need, and then continually monitoring and optimizing your efforts through multi-channel attribution. And that means, the ability to key and link multiple and disparate individual interactions across channels to understand buyer journeys that are producing the best outcomes. So that really enables you to make rapid adjustments to content, to offers, and even to spend to optimize the customer experience. This is an area where we're deeply engaged with customers, really helping them understand multi-channel attribution and get the most out of their investments. Finally, remove barriers and streamline process. That means making the purchase and ownership experience easy. So we see industry leaders really taking the friction out of their customer experiences. And so one, authenticating individuals and pre-populating applications and other forms based on just a few taps or keystrokes from the consumer. As Peter talked about earlier, just get me to my goal faster and easier. And then second, a focus on automatically validating identities to streamline the experience for good actors, while detecting possible fraudulent requests. So we see new advances in orchestrating a number of point solutions on the market, such as device fingerprinting, bodily and or behavioral biometrics, to really fast path good actors and then to screen out potential fraudsters. Okay. So that's a high level, and I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Teresa to lead us through some brief Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Peter. As a reminder to everyone, enter your question through the web conference system by typing your question in the chat box on the lower left of the window and clicking send. So we do have a couple of questions that have already been queued up for our speakers. Let's see, the first one, how relevant are these findings to other industries outside of banking? I'm in insurance.
So, Chris, I'm happy to answer first, and I'll hand it over to you. We may or may not see things the same. I don't know. So my quick answer here is, broadly speaking, I think the findings from our research with Equifax, our research, I don't know what the right way to phrase it, the research we did with Equifax, I think that certainly the bottom line is the same. Certainly for insurance, as well as some other industries like telecom, right? That disconnect is more or less evident in different industries, but it's a concern in virtually all. Other aspects of it. So let's talk about, for example, the idea of brand differentiation and being sort of a bank's or a customer's favorite bank brand. There, I do think there's enough difference that I'd be wary of taking this data and assuming it can be applied directly to insurance or, for that matter, telecom. People have a part of what we know that drives people's relationship with banking providers is, of course, their relationship with their money, right? The two aren't exactly synonymous, but they're part of the same emotional, sort of almost instinctual set of feelings and set of drivers that customers have. So, people's desire to use multiple financial providers, both in insurance and in banking, it grows out of that, right? It is sometimes an illogical, sometimes logical, but sometimes illogical sort of emotional force. And it is different. It is different enough, distinct enough in banking that I would be wary of assuming that you could apply them. But broadly speaking, as I said, I'll circle back to my first comment, which is the implications, I think you can say, a high degree of certainty that this applies to other financial industries as well. Chris, I don't know, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think the survey data was very specific around, what are your expectations from your bank or financial institution, but surrounding that was a lot of consumer behaviors and general expectations. And so, being able to understand unique needs to deliver new forms of utility and convenience that are raising the bar for literally all of us, the integrated, connected, multi-channel experience, personalization, relevancy, simplicity, all of those are more universal tenets for, creating compelling customer engagements.
And one last thing I'll quickly note. Oh, sorry, just one note I'll make here is the brand differentiation question. So it is important in all, right? That is a necessary component for success in a lot of industries. But the commoditization risk is more severe in financial services, which I am including insurance here, but in financial services broadly than it is in other industries. People don't tend to think, they might think that a couple of the big airlines are pretty similar, but they do think there's big differences between airlines, right, in the kind of service they get, et cetera, whether they'll be dragged off a plane. And likewise, we see in other industries. So there's some level of commoditization in any industry that's a risk. Banking, it's a greater risk than is in other areas.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Peter. And so the next question, this one gets a little more specific. It's around what should I include in my MarTech stack to help ensure a better personalized experience? So what should I include in my MarTech stack to start ensuring a better personalized experience?
So, Chris, I'll let you answer this one first. I'm not the MarTech expert. I'll give a bit of an answer to what we've heard from other banks afterwards, but I'll let you answer first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key there is to some degree the best practices that I was speaking about earlier. So having a good interconnected marketing technology stack is great. CRM, email, even some account-based marketing, or field intelligence, tools are great, but I think fundamentally, first leveraging a broad array of data to capture or create the fullest picture possible of the customer or the household, being able to key and link that data together and then providing, analytics on top, and then ensuring that the MarTech stack is connected to the operations of the business. And that means, again, being able to retarget in, digital scenarios in the wild or in your footprint, in your estate, in the call center, in the store, in the branch. So, making sure that the marketing technology stack is interconnected to the operations of the business, so you're getting that consistent, that consistent delivery over throughout the customer experience.
So actually, you sort of stole my answer. What I was going to say, and I'm a little wary of being sort of this is a very classic analyst answer, right? Where I'm basically saying, well, you're asking the wrong question, right? Which is always risk being a jerk. But here I think it's the right answer. So I'm not an expert on MarTech, so I'm not really going to answer that. Maybe that's part of it. But more important than any of that, which is, Chris, I think what you were implying, let me know if I misheard what you just said, is ensuring that your own systems, even before you build that or connect that MarTech stack, not the individual solutions from different vendors, but making sure that your data, the data that you either own or can utilize, is set up in a way that your MarTech stack can access it is the most important part, right? So basically, there was one bank we worked with that didn't talk about centralizing data, because that was a dangerous political word inside their organization, but talked about de-siloing the data. And maybe that's an even stupider word, I don't know. I liked it because it sort of acknowledged the fact that while it'd be nice to think that we have this central database where everything comes from, what's more pragmatic and more likely to be doable, right, the art of the possible, is building your data governance model and building, frankly, your data strategy in such a way that that
you are able to utilize that data to make the best use of that data. That matters a lot more. And then, we have separate research on MarTech. We have a bunch of folks that focus on that, and I'm not as knowledgeable about the individual parts of that.
Okay, thank you both. The next question, on the last slide, you mentioned to validate identity and help detect fraud. Are there certain experiences that customers prefer to accommodate this, or are you seeing any industry trends to accomplish this?
Yeah, I think the key there is, as I was mentioning, is that for a while the focus was on the latest point solution. So, a score or a new data element or a new technique or whatever. And I think where we're really seeing that, happening is more in platforms that are being able to orchestrate multiple. So as the dynamic fraudster tactics continue to shift, that the tool is in the platform is able to accommodate and orchestrate solutions to combat. And so, again, things like device fingerprinting and bodily biometrics, which are how you run your mouse and tap your phone or keyboard and things like that. Behavioral biometrics, and then bodily, retina, thumb, et cetera. And so being able to, orchestrate or tie these pieces together, again, to fast path the good actors, it's really less about how high can we build the wall to let, to capture, to keep out some of the bad actors and then, lots of false positives in there, but as much as, it is to verify a good actor identity and, fast path them to their goal or objective.
Yeah, I'll say quickly. So there are. I agree with Chris. There's the point solution is the way we've been thinking about it for a long time. That's evolving, and I'm a fan. For those of you who haven't read, none of this is my work, but I'm a big fan of Forrester's. Other folks at Forrester have written about zero trust. That is part of this conversation and one that I believe in strongly. So we're going to start to see that. I think that beyond that, a lot of this is out of individual banking organizations' hands. So there's a consortium up in Canada that I think is doing some really interesting work around identity management, and it is not government controlled, but the government sort of mandated a consortium of different players. So there's going to be some big trends that matter more. Beyond that, I definitely agree with Chris. For what we're talking about here around banking experiences, the most important thing is removing barriers from good actors, right? So enabling convenient experiences for the good actors. That is, and that's part of what I'm as you read some of my report titles at the very beginning of this, Teresa. One of them is around bots aren't ready to be bankers. Bots aren't ready to be bankers. Bots aren't ready to be bankers was built on there was too much hype around bots in a couple of phases and areas of banking. I believe strongly, though, that AI has a role to play here, and I think it'll play a powerful role, not in probably 2019, it'll start to show it, but into 2020, 2021, 2022. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep, I was going to squeeze one more.
No, go ahead, please.
Yep, one more question. And then if we didn't get to your questions, we will follow up within 1 to 2 weeks and just respond to all of the questions posed today via email. So that last question that we have is, we see customers dropping out of our online applications due to lengthy forms, perhaps. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I just talk quickly, and I hate to do a shameless plug, but I'll do that anyway. I mean, we have a technology that we call InstaTouch that's very apropos for that issue, and so lots of consumers dropping out of even short forms anymore. The patience and expectation very short for tapping out things on your phone as an example, and so with just 9 taps, say your last 4 of your social and your zip code. We've partnered with the big telco providers to identify who's holding that phone, linking keyed and linked to our data assets to then pull back a tremendous amount of data that can be used to pre-populate or fill pre-fill information for the consumer, making it much easier to and more quicker to get to to their goal. And so we see our customers using that online in particular, but even in call centers to reduce talk time and frustration for asking a whole bunch the consumer to provide a whole bunch of information. I think that was the question.
And I'll just say, you're absolutely right. The patience is wearing thin quickly, or the attention spans are even shorter. So we're seeing that evident. We're hearing that from bank executives around the world. Quickly, I'll give a philosophy that I like. One of the big tech disruptors has a internal policy of touch, not type. That's any chance that you can. The customer should be, if they can, forget voice interface or inputs versus typing inputs. Both of those pale in comparisons when it comes to convenience to one button touch, right? So the ability to offer up, and this is great, this is actually an area where conversational interfaces work really well, is serving up, is this that? Yes. Now, obviously, there's still going to need to be some manual entry for some processes in banking, but reducing that, really having an obsession with getting rid of barriers and friction and moving to a touch, not type, or touch, not speak, is valuable. Beyond that, there's going to be some abandonment because of that, but I think you can reduce that significantly.
Excellent. Thank you both. Now, for additional information, including our latest white paper that I referenced at the beginning of our webinar today, we encourage you to visit our website, and the web address is there at equifax.com/business/evolving customer expectations. We will also be publishing an infographic very soon, so you'll definitely want to check that out. You might also enjoy visiting our Equifax Business Insights blog, where additional related assets will be, and join the conversation also on LinkedIn and Twitter. And for more information on this particular topic or how Equifax can help you better meet customer expectations, please reach out to your account manager today or visit us online. It was our pleasure to share this information with you today, and as most of you are aware, Equifax is a global information solutions company. We use unique data assets, technology, analytics, and expertise to deliver information and create unparalleled insights through our customer-centric approach, flexible delivery methods, and scalable global platforms. On behalf of Peter, Chris, myself, and the entire team at Equifax, I want to thank you again for your time and for joining us today. We hope you found the information worthwhile and that it provided you with the kind of insights to help you master the customer experience. We look forward to working with you in the future, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. And with that, we must conclude today's program. This session has been recorded and will be available within 3 to 5 business days. You may access the recorded archive by using the same login information you used for today's live webinar. Feel free to share the recording link with your colleagues. On behalf of Consumer Bankers Association, thank you to our speakers and, of course, all of today's participants. Have a good afternoon. You may now disconnect.